taking something that's just dots on a page with some other written indications, and it's only ever existed in the mind of a composer. It's only ever existed there. And you have to have the courage to dive in and see what happens.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So today we're going to talk about meaning in music and finding meaningful work in music. And first, what are we doing?
Packing the car.
We're going to pack the car because we're starting our road trip to Missouri to do this recording project of music of Graham Lynch.
2-day drive. Here we come.
Here we go.
Sweet. Get some breakfast.
Breakfast? You don't eat breakfast.
Yes, I do.
You just need coffee. Okay, so we're making sure that we remembered everything. Oh, you know what we should get?
What?
Ice.
For our empty cooler?
For the empty cooler. It's not completely empty. It's got yogurt in it. You know what I remembered?
What?
The microphones. Check and see if I have my glasses, because that would be bad. That is gorgeous. Morning over the March in Charleston. I'm just excited for the process of figuring out the mic setup. So
And all the equipment.
Of course.
Hello again. We are still on the road. We've been on the road since just before 9 o'clock. It is now just before 7 o'clock. Oh, we have about 2 hours left to go, and we're gonna go to Paducah, Kentucky tonight.
So we were talking about meaning in music, and actually we're on the road because of one of those meaningful projects for us. We're going to Missouri, and we're gonna meet with our friend Albert Kim, and we're gonna record music of Graham Lynch, and that's a project that has a lot of meaning for a lot of reasons. And I think Kayleen and I have been talking about for years now, how do we spend our time doing more and more and more of the projects that are really meaningful, like this one, and less of the projects that are sort of things that we feel like maybe we have to do. Or
you have to do it because you're a classical musician.
Right. And you know, when you're a student, we all go through this. When you're a student, you have to do everything. First of all, it's juries or the next required degree recital or something like that. But then also you're taking any gig because you have to.
You've got to get the experience.
Right, or the paycheck or whatever. So, you know, this journey is one of seeing if we can maximize those projects that are really life-giving and that are super meaningful. And I think that's kind of what we've been aiming for in a very intentional way now for probably the last 2 years. I think we've really been intentional about that. And I think, you know, finding what's meaningful is the first step. And I think that takes a lot of forms. You know, I think for me personally, one of the things that I find most meaningful is collaborating with people who I really have a deep connection with. And so that can be collaboration playing traditional repertoire, but with musicians that I really admire and really respect and really believe in. Or it could be working with composers that I really love in terms of what they stand for and what they write, and how I can be involved in making that music come alive. Those meaningful projects could be things that I believe in because of maybe something that needs to be said or something that's relevant. Right now I think about, for example, last week's video we were talking about this amazing piece called Two Black Churches by Shawn Okpebholo, and sung by Liverman. And that concert is going to be coming up at the end of June, and that's incredibly meaningful, you know, for its own reasons. For me personally, since I'm also a composer, of course it's meaningful for me to do my own music for obvious reasons, but anyway, those are the types of projects that really, I think, I want to invest in, and I can't think of anything better to do with my time than to somehow lift someone else up. And there are so many ways to do that, and I don't know, I think that's kind of at the heart of it for me. What about you?
Yeah. I mean, obviously I agree with everything that Paul said. And then also for me, one of the things that I love most about performing is just connecting with people and telling stories, and hopefully those stories that come through, usually in song form, hopefully they can help somebody understand something about themselves or about the world, or just provide a moment of joy or sadness even. I mean, some kind of cathartic experience, hopefully. And then also doing that storytelling with people that I love and musicians that I respect. So, you know, obviously, Paul's one of those.
Thanks, honey. This is a little off topic, but not really. I was just thinking about meaningful projects and working with people you love. So actually, Kayleen and I met in a practice room at Eastman, and we were doing, the very first piece we ever rehearsed was Debussy.
C'est l'extase.
But when I met Kayleen, I had been going through a pretty rough patch, and I'd just written a pretty dark song cycle called Magus, and this was on poetry, actually texts by the bardic figure Taliesin, and so these were poems and texts from the book of Taliesin, and pretty dark and pretty intense about betrayal and sadness. And I just really resonated with his words, and it struck me that this life that Taliesin lived so long ago in such a far-off place, that we could get a glimpse of that and breathe a little bit of that air through his words that survived so many centuries.
Yeah.
And so getting a chance to set that to music was really, really important for me, and you used the word cathartic. It was a cathartic experience for me as well. But right as I finished that song cycle, I was sort of ready for some new things, and I started reading a lot of Sappho. In particular, the translations done by Sherod Santos, and it was at exactly that moment that I met Kayleen, and so I started writing some song settings of Sappho poems, translated by Sherod Santos, actually, and as I was writing them, I realized I was actually writing them for Kayleen. And so anyway, long story short, that song cycle, which was called The Journey, I ended up dedicating it to Kayleen, and it was my wedding present to Kayleen. So that was a pretty meaningful project, and we ended up getting to perform it a fair amount, and down the road we even recorded it, and it's on an album called Magus, which is actually the title of that other cycle I mentioned, which is also on that album. So that's a little bit about how we have found what types of projects are meaningful for us.
But that's a personal thing, and it will be different for everyone. I'm sure it'll be different for everyone listening to this. And that's what's so amazing about making a life in music, is when people are really doing what they believe in, they're going to offer something unique and special. We're going to talk more about meaning in music and finding how to make those types of projects happen in the next part of the video. But first we're going to get some rest in Paducah and then get on the road again. Good morning.
Morning.
We are in
Paducah, Kentucky.
Paducah, Kentucky. And we are going to hit the road and get to Warrensburg today
Yep.
and see Albert.
Yay, Albert.
Back here.
Cable doesn't reach.
Yep. If I had remembered the power strip, it would have been fine.
Okay, we made it, and
Where are we? Somewhere in Missouri?
yeah, we're at a Quick Trip. Oh,
So far the trip has been going pretty well.
I can apparently only turn right out of here.
Then don't turn left. We did run into some weather yesterday.
Yeah, it just like started dumping out of nowhere.
So we were talking about meaning in music and making a life in music. And for Keelan and I, how we've been really trying to be intentional about making more of the work we do the meaningful type that we really have wanted to do. So I think looking back on that journey as a student and even as a young professional just starting out, I think most people find that you just have to say yes
To
everything, and that's a good thing. I think the one condition with saying yes is that you say yes to the things that you know you can do really well. And if you do really well and you act professionally and you're courteous and easy to get along with and you deliver a good product, the odds are good that you'll be invited back. And if not, hey, you did your best. If it wasn't a good fit, it wasn't a good fit.
And sometimes it's a good fit. Oh, sorry.
No, go.
Sometimes it's a good fit, and you might get invited back, but it might not be for 5 years or something. So.
Right. And just because it doesn't happen right away doesn't mean it won't happen later down the road. And I think that's the key to all of this, is finding your own path and sort of making it work and realizing that what worked for one person may or may not work for you, and that's okay. The point is we have to find our own way. And realizing that there are really no set boundaries, there are no ways that it has to be done. You just have to do what you love and find a way to make that happen.
Get creative about the creative process.
So I think part of the equation for Kayleen and I in this journey of being more intentional about doing the meaningful projects has first been to define, a little bit at least, what sort of projects are meaningful. And one thing that we've sort of gravitated towards is new music. And both of us have a deep love for the standard repertoire.
Oh yeah.
Right? I mean,
oh my gosh.
It has nothing to do with not loving the standard repertoire or not finding it meaningful. That's absolutely not the case.
Schubert Nachschub Träume.
Oh my goodness. I mean, come on. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. But I think it's more that, first of all, we've been asked to do those things a fair amount. And in those projects, we've gotten to know several composers. And of course, when you have a personal relationship with a composer and you get to sort of be in dialogue with the composer while they're writing the piece for you,
It's the best.
yeah, it's of course is meaningful, and it's just a different type of engagement. And I think there's always room for more recordings of Bach or of Schumann or of Beethoven. Of course, there are always new things to be said with that repertoire. But I think for me, it's particularly exciting to dive into a piece that's never been recorded, but also never been performed. So in that case, you're taking something that's just dots on a page with some other written indications, and it's only ever existed in the mind of a composer. It's only ever existed there, and you have to have the courage to dive in, not really knowing what it's going to be like, not knowing if it's going to work, but being willing to risk that investment and see what happens. And it's such a privilege to get to be involved in that process, because music has to be embodied to be experienced by other people. And so we get to be part of that. And so a lot of these projects that we've done as a duo have been new music projects. Right now, these are the things that sort of grab my attention, and I think that's really at the heart of it, right? Is sort of finding what speaks to you.
Exactly, and that also plays in with the other end of the spectrum that I like to explore with early music, music of the Renaissance with Bedlam. A lot of times what makes it so cool is that it hasn't been performed for a really long time, or maybe ever.
And probably never recorded in many cases, too.
Yeah, exactly. So you just get to explore and bring a piece to life.
Yeah. And that goes back to that thing about saying yes. Oftentimes, I've had this experience, and I think I've spoken with a lot of colleagues who have had the same experience, where you say yes to something small, and then down the road it turns into something really big, and that's kind of cool. So, for example, this Graham Lynch project.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we're on our way to Missouri to record this CD for Graham Lynch's music, of Graham Lynch's music. So this all started with a project in 2018. Actually, I mentioned earlier in the video about the Sappho song cycle that I wrote for Kayleen as a wedding present. So I got in touch with some colleagues at the College of Charleston, where I'm on faculty, in various departments, including the classics department, and we organized a colloquium on the poetry of Sappho, and we invited some Sappho scholars, including Diane Rayor. And Diane is a leading Sappho scholar and had recently published a new translation of Sappho. As part of this colloquium, Kayleen and I were going to perform the Sappho cycle that I had written for Kayleen. And by some very serendipitous coincidences, Diane Rayor actually mentioned that a composer named Graham Lynch had recently set some of her translations of Sappho and asked if Kayleen and I would be willing to perform them. And so I didn't know Graham's music, but we thought, well, let's take a look at it. So we got a copy of the score from Graham and took a look at it and realized it had literally just been written. So this would be a world premiere. And, Kayleen and I took a look at it and thought, okay, well, we've got about a month. Let's give it a shot.
Oh my gosh.
So we took it on, and we ended up performing the world premiere of Graham's Sappho fragments. Alongside the song cycle that I wrote for Kayleen,
Journey,
called The Journey. piece, and the audience responded very well. And it was a really neat thing to get to perform that with Diane Rayor in the audience, who had done the translations that Graham used. So we kept in touch with Graham, and of course we sent him a recording of the performance. And he was very positive and very gracious, and we kept in touch. And it's been, my goodness, it's been over 2 years at this point since we've started our correspondence with Graham, through that very small moment where we said yes.
Yeah.
We said yes, we're going to perform this song cycle, which then turned out to be a world premiere, which is pretty cool. And then Graham ended up writing some other pieces specifically for Kayleen, and we haven't gotten to perform those yet, but we're
looking forward to that. And along the way, Graham wrote for me a piece called White Book 3, which is the third obviously in a series of giant pieces that are called White Books. And this particular one is based on paintings by Christopher Lebrun, and it's just a fascinating project, and it's really expanded my own horizons in a way. And I wasn't familiar with Lebrun's art, first of all, and Graham is a really deep thinker, and just getting to correspond with him and get to know his thoughts on music and the way he perceives art, and how he ties together his understanding of architecture and philosophy and visual arts with music. It's just amazing, and he's so inspiring, and getting to work alongside him in a way has been just wonderful. I also get to be performing 2 new pieces besides the White Book 3 on this album. One is called Absolute Inwardness, and the other is called the Couperin Sketchbooks. And I'll be excited to share more about those pieces with you later. But all this is to say, what's now become a long-term relationship with this composer, Graham Lynch, which is now resulting in recording a CD with our really good friend Albert Kim, who's going to be recording White Book 2, by the way. That all started with just a small fluke thing
that just, who could have anticipated that? So, and that happens all the time. The point is, these big projects can come out of really small ones. Just say yes and do a good job, and you never know where those things go. And I think what happens, at least what I've experienced, is that you say yes to these projects, you do a good job, and eventually you start getting opportunities back. So it's like you put things out there, and you put a lot of them out there, and you do your best in all of them. And maybe out of 100, one of them turns out to be something that grows.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always happen, but you have to be patient and be consistently good and be consistently courteous and professional. And eventually, those things will grow and will turn into other really cool projects and bigger things. And as those opportunities come, then you get to select more and more the things that you really want to do, and maybe leave some of the other things for another time.
Yeah, I mean, and that's also such a good thing to remind ourselves of also, during the dry spells when you put everything out there and nothing seems to be coming back.
That's true.
You just gotta keep plugging away and know that eventually something will come out of all that hard work.
So it's like 10 hours or something.
Hey!
Albert!
Hey, Kayleen.
What a year, right? Yeah. All right, we are here in Warrensburg. We made it, and we met with Albert, and Albert took us to Walmart so we could get
A surge protector.
since I forgot mine at home.
We've got our handy dandy masks.
Yep, and now we're gonna go over to the university. So we made it. Part 1 is done, and on to part 2. We are excited, and we'll see if this all works.
And we got green juice because I've been eating nothing but granola bars in the car for 2 days. Woo!
See you soon.